I just want to point out this episode is going to be talking about the NXIVM Cult. That's how it's pronounced. NXIVM. It's pronounced NXIVM. We're going to be going through it a little bit, but before we get into it, it's going to be a rough subject, so I wanted to give you guys something nice. We're going to go through something nice beforehand and something nice afterward to kind of take a breather and prepare ourselves for this. So before we get into it, let's just take a quick look at some good old-fashioned Christian T-shirts, okay? I know a lot of you guys have been Christian. A lot of you were Christian at some point. In fact, apparently about 20% of my audience is currently Christian, which honestly I'm pretty happy about. I'm glad to hear that there are Christians who listen to my stuff, because I would like to bring allies over from Christianity, as many as possible, as many as we can get to help fight extremism. You're welcome to be a part of it. You're welcome to be a part of the fight. So let's just take a look at some of these Christian shirts, and I know some of my audience members have worn some of these, and some of them actually sent me some examples of shirts that they wore. So let's take a look at some of these. This one says, "Lord, keep your arm around my shoulder and your hand over my mouth." What does that mean? It sounds like some kind of a weird BDSM thing. Which, as you'll find, apparently a lot of these Christian T-shirts sound like a weird BDSM thing. Jesus said, "Come unto me, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. Jesus is calling. Oh, God, it's awful. There is hope should oceans rise and mountains fall. He will never fall. Freedom through Jesus Christ. Faith, hope, and love. Created with a purpose. 1 Peter 1:2. I wonder what 1 Peter 1:2 says. Let's just Google that. Because sometimes I think they just put random BS Bible verses on these. 1 Peter 1:2. It says, "Who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit to be obedient to Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood. Grace and peace be yours in abundance." Okay, now let's read this again. Created with a purpose. What does that have to do with 1 Peter 1:2? I don't understand. Did they just slap some random Bible verse on here? Who've been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit to be obedient to Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood. I don't understand. I just think they just put some random Bible verse on here. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, let's continue looking at some of these shirts. This one is modeled after the Coca-Cola logo, and it says, "Enjoy Jesus Christ. Thou shalt never thirst." It's so bad. The next one says, "Coffee." It's an acronym. Christ offers forgiveness for everyone, everywhere. Jesus swag. This is the next shirt. Jesus swag. SWAG. Serve, worship, and glorify. There's another Bible verse under there. I would venture to guess if we Googled that Bible verse, it would have nothing to do with the shirt. Let's look at this next one. Jesus freak. I don't know if that's something you'd want to broadcast. Another shirt here says, "He is risen." Another says, "Team Jesus." Who would unironically wear these? Seriously. I was just talking about this with my girlfriend before the podcast started. And she was talking about how a lot of this stuff is kind of signaling. It's not converting anybody. It's not really doing any good for anybody exactly. It's not bringing believers into the fold. It's really signaling to people that you are a Christian. You are a fellow Christian. That's really what the goal is behind these T-shirts. And it kind of contributes, as she pointed out, it contributes to an us versus them attitude. It makes people feel a kinship with others who are wearing these shirts. These shirts are they're really terrible. Jesus, because of him. That's all that shirt says. Jesus, because of him. I don't really understand. All right, let's look at one more and then we'll move on to the NXIVM stuff. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Proverbs 3:5. Okay, I'm looking that one up too. They're not getting away with this. Proverbs 3:5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean on your own understanding." Okay, we found a shirt that the phrase matches the verse that it says on there. I'm glad we found one. They just don't even care, do they? They'll just slap anything on there. All right. I'll tell you what. Let's get into this NXIVM thing. I have not talked about this NXIVM situation because it's really, really ugly. Stephen Hassan has been talking about this for a while. It's commonly known as a sex cult, and there's been some really ugly stuff to do with it. Now, as you can see if you're watching the podcast, I am on Wikipedia. Let me explain before you start yelling at me. I don't use Wikipedia for anything, and the reason is because I was researching a cult one time, the 12 Tribes cult, and I discovered that the article about the 12 Tribes cult had been written by a 12 Tribes member. It ignored evidence. It pretended it didn't exist. It downplayed everything. It talked about the rest of the world as being aggressive toward them and things like that. It was very, very obviously biased from beginning to end. It was complete garbage. And that is why I don't use Wikipedia anymore, because Wikipedia is open for anybody to edit anything at any time. And as such, cults will send their members in to edit things. That's a common occurrence. So you can't really trust information from Wikipedia about cults. Not really. Now, that being said, I did review this article, and I feel that there is bias in this. I reviewed it once before the podcast, and I looked at the references, and most of the references are legit. But I feel like the spin that this article from Wikipedia gives to this cult is favorable toward the cult itself. So let's see what was written about this cult on Wikipedia. I don't really want to get too deep into NXIVM because it is actually very, very ugly thing. But I'll tell you what, let's just read the history of it, see what it has to say. In 1998, Keith Rainier and Nancy Salzman founded NXIVM, NXIVM is how it's spelled, a personal development company offering executive success programs, ESPs, and a range of techniques aimed at self-improvement. Rainier claimed that the program's main emphasis is to have people experience more joy in their lives. Sounds a little bit like Scientology to me. A prior business venture of Rainier's, Consumers Byline, was accused by the New York Attorney General of having been a pyramid scheme. Rainier signed a consent order in 1996 in which he denied any wrongdoing but agreed to pay pay a $40,000 fine and to be permanently banned from promoting, offering, or granting participation in a chain distribution scheme. One quick note here, Young Living is not technically a pyramid scheme. That's because a pyramid scheme doesn't sell a product. What they refer to here as a chain distribution scheme, that is what Young Living is. Young Living, they sell essential oils and things like that. They have a product. Since they have a product, they're not a pyramid scheme. They're a chain distribution scheme. There is a distinct legal difference, and that difference needs to be recognized in a lot of cases like this. So anyways, he was accused of running a pyramid scheme, apparently, and denied any wrongdoing, but agreed to pay $40,000 as a fine, and permanently banned from promoting, offering, or granting participation in a chain distribution scheme. So that's what happened in 1996. By 2003, some 3,700 people had taken part in ESP classes. Remember, ESP stands for Executive Success Programs, reportedly including businesswoman Sheila Johnson, former Surgeon General Antonia Novello, Enron executive Stephen Cooper, ooh, that's interesting, and Ana Cristina Fox, daughter of former Mexican President Vicente Fox. Other participants were later reported to include entrepreneur Richard Branson, who later denied having taken the classes, and actresses Linda Evans, Grace Park, and Nikki Klein. In the early 2000s, Seagram heiresses Claire and Sarah Bronfman, the daughters of Edgar Bronfman Sr., became attached to the organization. So, a lot of famous people got attached to the organization, basically. And it started in a lot of ways similarly to Scientology, which is not really exactly a religious cult. Scientology isn't. It's more of a psychology cult. I guess you could say this started a lot like Young Living did in many ways, and it operated a little bit like it too. During NXIVM seminars, students were expected to call Rainier and Salzman Vanguard and Prefect, respectively. The Hollywood Reporter stated that Rainier adopted the title Vanguard for a favorite arcade game he played as a child, in which the destruction of one's enemies increased one's own power. Within the organization, the reasoning of the titles was that Rainier was the leader of a philosophical movement and Salzman was his first student. NXIVM's training is a trade secret, subject to non-disclosure agreements, but reportedly uses a technique the organization calls rational inquiry to facilitate personal and professional development. In 2003, NXIVM sued the Ross Institute, alleging copyright infringement for publishing excerpts of content from its manual in 3 critical articles commissioned by cult investigator Rick Alan Ross and posted on his website. Ross posted a psychiatrist's assessment of NXIVM's secret manual on his website. The report called the regimen expensive brainwashing. The manual was obtained by Ross from the former member Stephanie Franco, a co-defendant in the trial who had signed a non-disclosure agreement not to divulge information from the manual to others. NXIVM filed suits in both New York and New Jersey, but both were later dismissed. Now, as you can see, this is kind of providing objective information, but a lot of that information does have a pro-NXIVM slant. That's kind of what I wanted to point out. But it mentioned Rick Alan Ross. I actually know of Rick Alan Ross. He is famously another cult expert, similar to Stephen Hassan. And he talks a little bit about some of Stephen Hassan's stuff, too. I think he's written a few books on cults. Yeah, Cults Inside Out. How people get in and how they can get out. That's one of his famous books. About NXIVM, it turned into this big, ugly sex cult where they were branding women against their will. I guess the women were willing to be branded, but they were being branded with something that they didn't intend to be branded with. They expected the brand to be one thing, but it turned out to be this guy, Keith Rainier, turned out to be his initials in very sensitive areas. And they went into the situation expecting something completely different. It ended up being a huge mess. Let me pull this up. This is New York Times. In late 2015, Mark Vicente, then a senior member of the cult-like group NXIVM, became disturbed about the physical deterioration of some women in the organization, including the actress Allison Mack. I began to see a lot of women just become wraith thin, he said on Monday, while testifying in the racketeering and sex trafficking trial of NXIVM's leader, Keith Rainier. It began to look like their skin was translucent. Mr. Vicente, who said that he believed that a long-standing concern over calories, weight, and appearance had led some women in NXIVM to cultivate a skeletal appearance, testified that he approached Mr. Rainier to air his fears, saying that Miss Mack seemed broken. The response Mr. Vicente remembered was striking. Mr. Rainier told him, "Well, I'm not trying to break her." On the stand on Monday for his second day of testimony, Mr. Vicente, a filmmaker from L.A., who spent more than a decade in NXIVM, described a near fixation among members on body image, a toxic view of women that he said was fostered by Mr. Rainier's teachings, and what he termed erratic behavior by Miss Mack, also a senior figure within the group. Mr. Rainier, 58, co-founded NXIVM in the 90s as a self-help organization. About 16,000 people took NXIVM courses, with some paying tens of thousands of dollars. He's now on trial in federal district court in Brooklyn, facing charges of racketeering, conspiracy, identity theft, extortion, forced labor, money laundering, wire fraud, and sex trafficking. Over the last several weeks, 5 women who were charged as his co-defendants, including Miss Mack, pleaded guilty. Prosecutors have told jurors in the case that Mr. Rainier claimed to be a guru, but was actually a charlatan who used NXIVM as a vehicle to control women. Former members have said that Mr. Rainier encouraged female followers to nearly starve themselves so that they might achieve the sort of physique he found most appealing. Anyways, really, really ugly situation, really horrific stuff, and sex crimes get to me deeper than others for one reason or another. I just hate it. I can't stand it. I don't like reading about it or hearing about it or any of that other stuff. It really gets to me. It's really, really heartbreaking, and I'm genuinely glad that Stephen Hassan and Rick Ross are talking about this stuff, because I just don't think that I can. I don't think that I can cover it in great detail, honestly. It's just really horrific. So anyway, that's my bit on NXIVM. I may end up covering it more. That's my bit on NXIVM. As I said, I'd rather not read about it at all. It's pretty ugly stuff, but especially like child sex abuse cases. I've had to power through that stuff because Jehovah's Witnesses have an issue with it. A lot of cults seem to have an issue with that, and I just do not enjoy reading about it or talking about it, but I do. I feel obligated to talk about that stuff because it's such a deep, horrific part of this. It's just kind of part of the job, you know? So anyway, now that bit is over, let's look at more Christian shirts. Let's calm down from that huge, ugly mess. These are so bad. It is well with my soul. I'm not sure what that means. This shirt says, it is well with my soul. And then another shirt says, not today, Satan. I love it. Maybe I should get a shirt that says, not today, God, because I'm on Satan's payroll. If anybody is on Satan's payroll, I'm on Satan's payroll. I mean, I am being paid to talk shit about Jesus, pretty much, right? So if anybody is on his payroll, then it's me. I need a shirt that says, not today, God. And here's another shirt. It says, Crusader for Christ. Holy God. And it's a picture of a crusader on a horse with a shield that has a cross on it. That is dark. That is dark. I got to say that. Here's another one. It says, it's not about me, it's about him, and it's in the shape of a cross. Another one says cross training, and it's a picture of a guy carrying a cross. That's kind of lame. Here's a shirt. It's not a Christian one, but it says, save the chubby unicorn, and it's a picture of a white rhino. That's awesome. I actually love that shirt. I may have to get one of those at some point. Anyway, okay, that's the end of our segment. God, I just can't stand some of that ugly stuff.